The dust devils danced across the horizon as Georgiana Mackenzie limped toward the tiny outpost town of Redemption Creek. Her bare feet bloodied and blistered from miles of walking. The stagecoach that had ejected her 10 miles back had disappeared hours ago, leaving nothing but a trail of dust and the echo of the driver's cruel laughter. Her life savings stolen, her trunk of possessions gone. And now her shoes had given out completely, the soles worn through until they were useless, abandoned reluctantly beside the trail. Arizona Territory 1883 was no place for a woman alone. The sun beat down mercilessly as Georgiana pushed forward, her calico dress sticking to her skin, her chestnut hair falling loose from its pins. The town shimmered like a mirage before her, the heat distorting the wooden buildings until they wavered in her vision. Just a little further, just a few more steps. Her foot landed on a sharp rock, and she cried out, stumbling forward. The world tilted dangerously, but instead of meeting the hard ground, she collided with something solid and warm. "Whoa there," a deep voice said, strong hands steadying her. "You all right, miss?" Georgiana blinked up into the face of a man silhouetted against the blinding sun. All she could make out was the shape of a cowboy hat and broad shoulders before her knees buckled. "I am sorry," she managed, trying to regain her footing. "I didn't see you." "No need for apologies." The man's voice was low and gentle, with a hint of roughness around the edges. As her vision cleared, she saw kind eyes, the color of a summer storm, studying her with concern. His face was tanned and weathered, with a strong jaw shadowed by a day's growth of beard. He couldn't have been more than 30. He glanced down at her feet, taking in the raw, dust-covered skin and bloody scrapes. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," Georgiana said, attempting to straighten herself, though she couldn't quite manage it. Pride was all she had left. The cowboy's brow furrowed as he looked back toward the empty trail. "Where are your shoes, miss? And what in God's name are you doing out here alone?" Georgiana swayed slightly. "My shoes. They fell apart. The stagecoach." She couldn't finish, exhaustion and dehydration stealing her words. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "They left you? Those bastards." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Name's Caleb McKinnon, miss. Ranch foreman at the Triple M." He offered a canteen. "Drink this. Slowly now." The water was warm but felt like heaven as it trickled down her parched throat. Georgiana handed it back with trembling hands. "Georgiana Mackenzie. I was traveling to Tucson to take a teaching position." Caleb looked back at the town, then down at her battered feet. Wordlessly, he bent down and examined them, his touch surprisingly gentle for hands so clearly accustomed to hard labor. "You can't walk another step on these," he said firmly, rising to his full height. He looked at her with a quiet determination that made her heart flutter oddly despite her distress. She stood barefoot in the dust, feeling small and vulnerable before him. "Shoes or not, I'll walk beside you," he said simply, offering his arm. "Lean on me." Georgiana hesitated, years of propriety warring with desperate need. "Sir, I couldn't possibly—" "Miss Mackenzie," he interrupted gently. "There's no shame in accepting help when you need it. Out here, that's how people survive." Something in his honest gaze broke through her resistance. She placed her hand on his offered arm, feeling the solid muscle beneath his worn shirt. "Thank you, Mr. McKinnon." "Caleb," he corrected, adjusting his stance to support her weight. "We're not much for formalities in Redemption Creek." They began walking slowly toward the town, her bare feet finding smoother ground with his guidance. She was acutely aware of his strength beside her, the subtle scent of leather and pine that clung to him. "What brought you all the way out here for a teaching position?" he asked, carefully matching his long stride to her hobbling gait. "My father passed last winter," she replied, focusing on placing each step carefully. Our farm in Pennsylvania couldn't sustain itself under the mortgage. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Tucson, it seemed like Providence. His jaw tightened. And those stagecoach bandits took everything? She nodded, swallowing hard. Everything except the clothes I'm wearing and my father's pocket watch. Her hand instinctively went to the small timepiece hidden in her dress pocket, the only reminder of home she had left. Bastards, he muttered again, then glanced at her. Pardon my language, madam. Despite everything, a small smile tugged at her lips. I believe I share the sentiment, Mr. McKinnon Caleb. As they approached the town, Georgiana became increasingly aware of her disheveled appearance. Her dress was torn and dirty, her hair falling wildly around her shoulders. She must look like a madwoman. Where are you taking me? She asked, suddenly nervous about being presented to strangers in such a state. Doc Miller's wife runs a boarding house, Caleb explained. Margaret's a good woman. She'll help you get sorted. The main street of Redemption Creek was surprisingly busy for such a small settlement. A few wagons were parked outside the general store, and men in dusty clothes moved between the saloon and the livery. Several people nodded respectfully to Caleb as they passed. You seem well known here, Georgiana observed, trying to ignore the curious stares directed their way. Caleb's mouth quirked. Been working these parts for almost 10 years now. Started as a ranch hand, worked my way up. Triple M is the biggest spread in the county. They stopped in front of a 2-story white building with a small sign reading Miller Boarding House. The porch was swept clean, and pots of desert flowers added touches of color to the otherwise plain structure. Before they could climb the steps, the door swung open, revealing a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense expression. Caleb McKinnon, what trouble have you brought to my doorstep now? She asked, though her tone held more affection than censure. Mrs. Miller, this is Miss Georgiana Mackenzie, Caleb said respectfully. She was robbed and abandoned by the stagecoach heading to Tucson. She needs a place to stay and some medical attention. Margaret Miller's eyes widened as she took in Georgiana's state, her gaze lingering on her bloody feet. Lord have mercy, child. Come in immediately. Before Georgiana could protest, Caleb had swept her up into his arms, carrying her up the porch steps as if she weighed nothing. She gasped, instinctively wrapping her arms around his neck. This isn't necessary, she whispered, mortified. It is, he replied simply, his breath warm against her ear. And it's no burden. Inside, the boarding house was cool and smelled of fresh bread and lavender. Caleb gently set her down on a sofa in the front parlor. Margaret was already bustling about, gathering supplies. I'll fetch some hot water and bandages, she said. Caleb, make yourself useful and go get document. Yes, madam, he replied with an obedient nod that suggested he knew better than to argue. Before leaving, he turned to Georgiana. I'll be back shortly. You're in good hands. Once he was gone, Margaret returned with a basin of water and clean cloths. Now, dear, let's get you cleaned up before Doc arrives. As the older woman tenderly washed her feet, Georgiana found herself fighting back tears. I don't know how to thank you. I have no money to pay for your kindness. Margaret waved away her concerns. Any friend of Caleb's is welcome here. Besides, we look after our own in Redemption Creek. But I'm not one of your own, Georgiana said softly. I'm a stranger. The older woman looked up with a warm smile. Not anymore, you're not. By the time Dr. Miller arrived with Caleb, Georgiana's feet were clean, her face washed, and her hair neatly pinned back. The doctor was a tall, thin man with spectacles and a gentle manner that immediately put her at ease. After examining her feet, he pronounced that she would recover with rest and proper care. No walking for at least 3 days, he instructed firmly. Those blisters need time to heal, and I'm concerned about infection in some of these deeper cuts. But I need to find work, Georgiana protested. I can't impose on Mrs. Miller's generosity indefinitely. Don't you worry about that just yet, Margaret said firmly. First, you heal. Caleb, who had been standing quietly by the door, stepped forward. About that work. The schoolhouse has been empty since Miss Abernathy left last spring. Town's been looking for a teacher. Georgiana's heart leaped. But I was headed to Tucson. Tucson's got plenty of educated folks, Caleb said. Our children have been running wild for months. I reckon the town council would be mighty pleased to hear you're qualified. Dr. Miller nodded enthusiastically. He's right. My own boys could use some proper schooling. I'll speak to Mayor Hargrove tomorrow. Hope, fragile but persistent, blossomed in Georgiana's chest. If there's truly a position available, I would be most grateful for the opportunity. Then it's settled, Margaret declared. You'll stay here while you recover, and then we'll get you situated at the schoolhouse. Later, after a hearty meal and with her feet properly bandaged, Georgiana sat on the porch in a rocking chair borrowed from Margaret's parlor. The sun was setting over the distant mountains, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. The creak of boots on wood announced Caleb's return. He'd disappeared after dinner, saying he had ranch business to attend to, but now he stood before her, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. Mind if I join you? He asked. Please do, she replied, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. He settled his large frame into the rocker, placing his hat on his knee. For a moment, they sat in companionable silence, watching the sunset. I spoke with the mayor, Caleb finally said. He's calling a town meeting tomorrow evening to discuss hiring you as the schoolteacher. Georgiana turned to him in surprise. Already? But they don't even know me. Caleb's mouth curved into a smile. My word carries some weight around here. Besides, qualified teachers don't exactly grow on cactus in these parts. I don't know how to thank you, she said softly. If you hadn't found me today. Let's not dwell on that, he replied, his voice low. I'm just glad I was passing through when I was. What brought you to that stretch of road? She asked, realizing she'd never questioned the fortuitous timing of his appearance. A shadow passed over his face. I was tracking rustlers. They've been hitting the smaller ranches in the area. Thought I might pick up their trail. Instead, you found me, Georgiana said. His gray eyes met hers, something unreadable in their depths. I'd say that was the better discovery. Heat that had nothing to do with the Arizona climate rose to her cheeks. Mr. McKinnon, Caleb, he reminded her gently. Caleb, she corrected herself. I hope you don't think me forward, but I must know, why are you helping me so? You owe me nothing. He was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the darkening landscape. My mother came west as a young woman, not much older than you. She traveled alone, determined to make a life for herself teaching. His hands, large and calloused, turned his hat slowly. She encountered folks who helped her along the way, and others who didn't. She always taught me that the measure of a person is how they treat others when there's nothing to gain. She sounds like a remarkable woman, Georgiana said softly. She was, he agreed, a hint of old grief in his voice. Yellow fever took her 5 years back. I'm sorry, she said, understanding the loss all too well. He nodded in acknowledgement. So you see, Miss Mackenzie, helping you isn't charity. It's honoring her memory. The simple honesty of his words touched her deeply. In Pennsylvania, men had courted her with flowery compliments and grand gestures. None had ever spoken to her with such straightforward sincerity. Still, she said, I am grateful. A comfortable silence fell between them as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The air cooled rapidly as night descended over the desert, and Georgiana shivered slightly in her thin dress. Without comment, Caleb shrugged off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The warmth of him clung to the material, enveloping her in its comfort. "I should let you rest," he said, rising from his chair. "Doctor's orders." "Will you be at the town meeting tomorrow?" she asked, reluctant to see him go. He nodded. "I'll come by in the afternoon to escort you, if that's agreeable." "Very much so," she replied. He settled his hat on his head and tipped the brim to her. "Good night, Miss Mackenzie." "Georgiana," she corrected with a small smile. "If we're not much for formalities in Redemption Creek." His answering smile transformed his weathered face, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "Good night, Georgiana." As she watched him walk away, his tall figure silhouetted against the night sky, Georgiana pulled his jacket tighter around her shoulders. For the first time since leaving Pennsylvania, she felt something close to hope. True to Dr. Miller's prediction, the town council was enthusiastic about hiring Georgiana. The meeting was held in the town's small church, with most of Redemption Creek's residents in attendance. Mayor Hargrove, a stout man with an impressive mustache, led the proceedings. "As you all know, our schoolhouse has been sitting empty since Miss Abernathy left to get married," he announced. "Miss Mackenzie here comes highly recommended and has experience teaching children of all ages." Georgiana, seated beside Caleb in the front pew, felt dozens of curious eyes upon her. She had borrowed a dress from Margaret Miller, which was a bit too large but clean and presentable. Her feet, still tender but much improved, were encased in soft slippers that Margaret had also provided. "I'd like to hear from the lady herself," called out a woman from the back. "What brings you to our little town, Miss Mackenzie?" Caleb gave her an encouraging nod as Georgiana rose to address the gathering. Her heart pounded, but her voice remained steady as she explained her background, her education at a women's seminary in Philadelphia, and her 3 years of teaching at a country school in Pennsylvania. "While I did not plan to stop in Redemption Creek," she concluded honestly, "I now believe that Providence guided me here. If you'll have me, I would be honored to teach your children." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. After a brief discussion about salary and accommodations, the schoolhouse included small living quarters for the teacher. The council voted unanimously to hire her. "You can start as soon as your feet are healed," Mayor Hargrove declared. "We'll spread the word for the children to report to school next Monday." As the meeting dispersed, townspeople approached to introduce themselves. There was Mrs. Peterson, who ran the general store with her husband, Sheriff Wallace, a taciturn man with kind eyes, and countless mothers eager to tell her about their children. Through it all, Caleb remained by her side, a steady presence that both reassured and distracted her. She was acutely aware of him, the way he stood slightly behind her, ready to intervene if she tired, how his hand occasionally touched her elbow to support her, the respect with which the other men treated him. By the time they left the church, night had fallen again, and Georgiana was exhausted but elated. Caleb insisted on escorting her back to the boarding house, though it was just down the street. "I would say that went well," he remarked as they walked slowly, mindful of her healing feet. "Better than I could have hoped," she agreed. "Everyone has been so welcoming." "They're good people," Caleb said. "Hard-working and honest for the most part. Their children deserve a proper education." "I noticed you don't have children of your own to enroll," Georgiana ventured, immediately regretting the personal nature of the question. Caleb was offended he didn't show it. "Never found the right woman to settle down with," he replied evenly. "Ranch work doesn't leave much time for courting." "No Mrs. McKinnon waiting at home then?" she asked, trying to sound casual. The corner of his mouth lifted. "No, madam. Just me and my horse." They reached the boarding house, pausing at the bottom of the porch steps. In the silver moonlight, Caleb's features were cast in shadow beneath his hat brim, but she could feel the intensity of his gaze. "Thank you for your support tonight," she said. "I don't think they would have accepted me so readily without your endorsement." "They would have seen your worth regardless," he replied. "But I'm glad I could help." A brief silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words. Finally, Caleb cleared his throat. "I'll be headed back to the ranch tomorrow. Got work that needs tending." Disappointment settled in her chest, though she knew it was foolish. Of course, he had responsibilities beyond helping a stranded schoolteacher. "Will I see you again before school starts?" she asked, hating how vulnerable the question made her feel. "Count on it," he said, his deep voice a reassurance. "I need to check in with the mayor about those rustlers anyway." He tipped his hat to her. "Good night, Georgiana." "Good night, Caleb." She watched him walk away until his figure disappeared into the darkness, then climbed the steps to the boarding house, already looking forward to his return. The next few days passed quickly as Georgiana prepared for her new position. Mrs. Miller introduced her to several families with school-age children, and Mayor Hargrove provided the key to the schoolhouse. The small building was dusty from disuse but solidly built, with rows of desks, a teacher's desk at the front, and a pot-bellied stove for heating. Behind the classroom was a modest apartment consisting of a sitting room, bedroom, and tiny kitchen. "It's not fancy," the mayor apologized, "but it's private and rent-free as part of your compensation." "It's perfect," Georgiana assured him, already envisioning how she would arrange her meager belongings, what few items she'd managed to purchase with an advance on her salary. By Saturday, her feet had healed enough for her to walk comfortably, and she spent the day cleaning the schoolhouse and apartment with Margaret's help. They scrubbed floors, washed windows, and dusted every surface until the place gleamed. "It looks like a proper school again," Margaret declared, setting down her broom with satisfaction. "The children will be so excited." Georgiana surveyed their work with pride. "I hope I can live up to everyone's expectations." "You'll do fine," Margaret assured her. "And don't worry about the troublemakers. Every school has them, but our children are generally well-behaved." They were gathering their cleaning supplies when a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Caleb filled the frame, hat in hand, looking somewhat out of place in the classroom setting. "Ladies," he greeted them, his eyes finding Georgiana's immediately. "Place looks mighty improved." "Caleb," Georgiana said, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "I didn't know you were back in town." "Just rode in," he replied. "Thought I'd check on your progress." Margaret glanced between them with knowing eyes. "I should get back to the boarding house. Those biscuits won't bake themselves." She patted Georgiana's arm. "You finish up here. Don't rush back on my account." After Margaret left, a slightly awkward silence filled the room. Caleb stood just inside the doorway, turning his hat in his hands. "How are your feet?" he asked finally. "Much better, thank you," she replied, suddenly aware of the dust on her apron and the wisps of hair that had escaped her bun. He nodded, seeming pleased. "Good, that's good." He glanced around the classroom. "So you start teaching on Monday?" "Yes, we're expecting 15 students, ranging from 6 to 16 years old." "Quite a range to manage alone," he observed. "I've taught in a one-room schoolhouse before," she assured him. "The older students often help with the younger ones." Caleb took a step further into the room, his spurs jingling softly against the wooden floor. "I brought you something. A welcome gift, I suppose." From behind his back, he produced a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "You didn't need to do that," she said, touched by the gesture as she accepted the package. "Go ahead, open it." he encouraged, a hint of nervousness in his usually confident demeanor. Carefully, Georgiana untied the string and unwrapped the paper. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal, its cover tooled with a delicate pattern of wildflowers. "Oh, Caleb," she breathed, running her fingers over the soft leather. "It's beautiful. Thought you might like to keep a record of your new beginnings," he said, watching her face carefully. Peterson at the general store said it came all the way from San Francisco. The thoughtfulness of the gift made her throat tight with emotion. "Thank you. I shall treasure it." His smile was warm, reaching his eyes and creating crinkles at the corners. "There's something else, too." He stepped outside briefly and returned with a burlap sack. Setting it on one of the student desks, he opened it to reveal a pair of sturdy women's boots. "I noticed you didn't have proper footwear," he explained, a slight flush coloring his tan cheeks. "Desert's no place to be without good boots." Had to guess at the size, but Mrs. Peterson helped. Georgiana stared at the boots, overwhelmed by his kindness. They were plainly made but of good quality leather, with practical heels and strong laces far sturdier than the delicate slippers she'd been wearing. "I can't accept these," she protested weakly. "The journal is gift enough." Caleb's expression grew serious. "You can and you will. Consider it my contribution to the education of Redemption Creek's children. Can't have their teacher laid up with injured feet again." When she still hesitated, he added more softly, "Please, Georgiana, it would ease my mind knowing you're properly equipped for life out here." The genuine concern in his voice melted her resistance. "Thank you," she said simply. "Your kindness continues to humble me." He shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Just being practical. But they both knew it was more than that. On Monday morning, Georgiana stood on the schoolhouse steps, watching as children began to arrive. She wore her new boots beneath her best dress, and her hair was neatly arranged in a practical bun. The school bell hung ready beside the door, waiting to be rung for the first time under her stewardship. Families came on foot, on horseback, and in wagons, introducing children who regarded her with varying degrees of curiosity and suspicion. By 8 o'clock, all 15 students were assembled in the yard, 8 boys and 7 girls, just as Mayor Hargrove had predicted. Taking a deep breath, Georgiana rang the bell, its clear tone echoing across the schoolyard. "Good morning, children. Please line up by age, youngest to oldest, and we'll go inside to begin our day." To her relief, they complied without argument, forming a reasonably straight line. As they filed into the classroom, Georgiana noticed a figure on horseback watching from across the street. Caleb sat astride a magnificent chestnut gelding, his expression unreadable beneath his hat brim. When he saw her looking, he touched the brim in a silent salute before turning his horse and riding away. The gesture buoyed her spirits as she closed the schoolhouse door and turned to face her new students. "Welcome to the first day of school. I am Miss Mackenzie, and I'm very pleased to meet each of you." The first week of teaching passed in a blur of activity. Georgiana assessed each child's level of education, established classroom rules, and began dividing them into appropriate learning groups. Some, like 14-year-old Daniel Miller, the doctor's eldest son, were well-read and quick to learn. Others, particularly the children from outlying ranches who had received little formal education, required more basic instruction. By Friday afternoon, she had settled into a rhythm, moving between groups as they worked on different assignments. The youngest children were practicing their letters at the front of the room, while the older students read quietly or worked on arithmetic problems. A knock at the door interrupted the peaceful scene. Sheriff Wallace stood there, hat in hand, looking apologetic. "Pardon the interruption, Miss Mackenzie, but I need a word with you." Concern flickered through her. "Of course. Children, continue with your work. Daniel, Please oversee the class for a moment. The teenager nodded seriously, accepting the responsibility with pride. Outside on the porch, Sheriff Wallace twisted his hat nervously. There's been trouble, madam. Rustlers hit the Triple M last night. Shot one of the ranch hands. Her heart lurched painfully. Caleb? He's alive. The sheriff assured her quickly. But he took a bullet defending the herd. Doc Miller's with him now at the ranch house. Relief made her knees weak. How serious is it? Bullet went clean through his shoulder. Doc says he'll recover with rest, but he's lost a fair amount of blood. The sheriff hesitated. He's been asking for you, madam. That's why I'm here. Doc thought seeing you might help settle him. Georgiana glanced back at the classroom, torn between her duty to her students and her urgent desire to go to Caleb. School day's almost done anyway, Sheriff Wallace added, reading her hesitation. I can have my deputy watch the children until parents arrive. Decision made. Georgiana nodded firmly. Please do. I'll gather my things. 20 minutes later, she was riding beside the sheriff in his wagon, heading toward the Triple M ranch. The property lay about 5 miles outside town, nestled against the foothills where good grazing land was available. How did it happen? She asked as they traveled. Rustlers came in the night, aiming to drive off a portion of the herd, Wallace explained. Caleb and 2 of his hands caught them in the act. There was gunfire. One of the rustlers was hit, but they managed to escape. Left their dead behind, though, so we've got something to go on this time. They crested a rise, and suddenly the Triple M spread out before them a large ranch house, several outbuildings, corrals, and a bunkhouse, all surrounded by vast stretches of grazing land. A wooden arch over the main gate bore the ranch's brand, 3M's carved into the timber. It's larger than I imagined, Georgiana murmured. Triple M is the biggest ranch in the county, Wallace replied. McKinnon's built it up considerable since taking over as foreman 5 years back. Owner lives back east somewhere, leaves the running of things to Caleb. They pulled up to the main house, a substantial 2-story structure built of timber and stone. A worried-looking cowboy took charge of the horses as they dismounted. How is he, Pete? The sheriff asked. Doc says he'll live, but he's mighty weak, the cowboy replied, leading their horses away. Dr. Miller met them at the door, looking tired but relieved to see Georgiana. Good you're here. He's been restless, which isn't helping with the blood loss. Maybe you can get him to settle down. He led her upstairs to a large bedroom at the end of the hall. The curtains were drawn against the afternoon sun, casting the room in shadow. On the bed lay Caleb, his normally tanned face pale against the pillows. His left shoulder was heavily bandaged, and a sheen of sweat covered his brow. Georgiana moved to his side, her heart aching at the sight of him so weakened. She took the chair beside the bed, gently laying her hand over his. Caleb, she called softly. It's Georgiana. His eyelids fluttered, then opened, revealing gray eyes clouded with pain. For a moment he seemed confused, then recognition dawned. Georgiana, he murmured, his voice rough. You shouldn't be here. Nonsense, she replied, trying to keep her tone light despite the fear clutching at her heart. Where else would I be when you're in need of scolding for getting yourself shot? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. The children are fine, she assured him. School was almost finished for the day. He seemed to relax slightly at that, some of the tension leaving his body. Sorry to drag you all the way out here. You didn't drag me anywhere, she said firmly. I came of my own accord, Dr. Miller approached the bed, checking Caleb's pulse. His fever's down, which is a good sign. The wound is clean, and with proper rest, he should recover fully. He gave Caleb a stern look. But I mean proper rest, McKinnon. No riding, no ranch work for at least 2 weeks. Caleb began to protest, but Georgiana cut him off. "He'll follow your instructions exactly, doctor," she said with such authority that both men looked at her in surprise. "I'll make certain of it." Dr. Miller's eyebrows rose, but he nodded approvingly. "Good. I've left medicine and fresh bandages with Mrs. Flores, the housekeeper. The wound needs cleaning and redressing twice daily." After giving a few more instructions, the doctor prepared to leave. "Sheriff, if you could give me a ride back to town, I have other patients to see." When they were gone, a heavy silence fell over the room. Caleb watched Georgiana with an intensity that made her flush. "You don't have to stay," he said finally. "Mrs. Flores can manage." "Do you want me to leave?" she asked directly. He held her gaze for a long moment. "No," he admitted quietly. "Then I'm staying," she said simply. "At least until you're out of danger. What about school on Monday?" "I'll ride back early Monday morning," she replied. "It's not so far." His expression softened. "You're a stubborn woman, Georgiana Mackenzie." "So I've been told," she said with a small smile. "Now, are you thirsty? Dr. Miller said you should drink plenty of water." She helped him sit up slightly, supporting his back as he drank from the glass she held to his lips. The simple act of caring for him felt right somehow, as if she'd been doing it far longer than the few minutes she'd been there. Later, after Mrs. Flores had shown her to a guest room and provided a simple dinner, Georgiana returned to Caleb's bedside. He had drifted off to sleep but woke when she entered. "You're still here," he murmured, sounding pleased. "I told you I would be," she replied, resuming her seat beside him. "How's the pain?" "Manageable," he said, though the tightness around his eyes suggested otherwise. "You're a terrible liar, Caleb McKinnon," she chided gently. "Dr. Miller left laudanum if you need it." He shook his head. "Makes my thoughts fuzzy. I'd rather bear the pain and keep a clear head." "Stubborn man," she sighed, but didn't press the issue. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds visible through a gap in the curtains. Georgiana moved to the window, drawn by the beauty of the desert landscape spread out before her. "It's magnificent," she said softly. "I've never seen such colors." "That's why I stay," Caleb said from the bed. "First time I saw an Arizona sunset, I knew I'd never be satisfied anywhere else." She turned back to him. "Tell me about your ranch." A spark of pride lit his eyes as he began to speak of the Triple M, how he'd started as a simple ranch hand and worked his way up to foreman. How the absentee owner, a businessman from Boston, had gradually given him more authority until he was running the entire operation. He described the challenges of raising cattle in the desert, the satisfaction of seeing a good calf crop, the freedom of riding the range. As he spoke, color returned to his face, and his voice grew stronger. Georgiana listened intently, asking questions that showed her genuine interest. When he finally fell silent, exhaustion overtaking him again, she realized twilight had deepened into full night. "You should rest now," she said, rising from her chair. "I've kept you talking too long." "No," he protested weakly. "Your company eases the pain more than any medicine could." The simple honesty of his words touched her deeply. "Then I'll sit with you until you fall asleep." She resumed her seat, taking his hand in hers. His fingers curled around hers, warm and strong despite his weakened state. "Georgiana," he said, his voice low, "thank you for coming." "Thank you for not dying," she replied, only half joking. His lips curved in a tired smile. "I'll do my best to continue that trend." She watched as his eyelids grew heavy, finally closing as sleep claimed him. Even then, she didn't release his hand, drawing comfort from the steady beat of his pulse beneath her fingers. "Rest well, Caleb," she whispered, allowing herself to smooth a lock of dark hair from his forehead. In the quiet of the room, with only the sound of his even breathing, Georgiana acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding. She was falling in love with Caleb McKinnon. The realization should have frightened her. They'd known each other barely 2 weeks, but instead, it filled her with a sense of rightness, as if her heart had recognized something her mind was just discovering. Whether he could ever return her feelings remained to be seen. But for now, it was enough to sit beside him, holding his hand as he slept, keeping watch through the night. Over the next 2 days, Caleb's condition improved steadily. By Sunday afternoon, he was strong enough to sit up in bed and take solid food. Georgiana divided her time between caring for him and exploring the ranch house, which was much larger and more comfortably appointed than she had expected. The owner's wife decorated it, Caleb explained when she commented on the quality of the furnishings. She visits once a year, usually in winter when Boston is buried in snow. It's a beautiful home, Georgiana said, arranging fresh wildflowers in a vase beside his bed. Mrs. Flores had been happy to relinquish much of Caleb's care to her, focusing instead on running the household and preparing meals. "Never much thought about it," Caleb admitted. "It's just where I sleep when I'm not working." Georgiana shook her head in mock exasperation. "Men, surrounded by beauty and comfort, and you don't even notice." "I notice beauty when it matters," he replied, his eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her blush. To hide her reaction, she busied herself straightening his blankets. "Dr. Miller will be visiting this evening to check your progress. I should change your bandages before he arrives." Caleb submitted to her ministrations with surprising patience as she carefully removed the old bandages, cleaned the wound with carbolic solution, and applied fresh dressings. The bullet had passed cleanly through the fleshy part of his shoulder, missing bone and major blood vessels, a fortunate outcome, according to Dr. Miller. "You have gentle hands," Caleb observed as she worked. "Like my mother." "Was she a nurse?" Georgiana asked, securing the bandage with neat, even ties. "No, but she tended anyone who needed care," he replied. "Said healing was God's work, and she was just his instrument." "A wise woman," Georgiana said, helping him ease back against the pillows. "I wish I could have met her." A shadow crossed his face. "She would have liked you very much." The simple statement warmed her more than any elaborate compliment could have. That evening, after Dr. Miller had examined Caleb and pronounced him healing well, Georgiana faced the reality that she needed to return to town for school the next day. She found herself reluctant to leave, worry gnawing at her despite the doctor's assurances. "I'll send word if there's any change," Dr. Miller promised as they stood in the hallway outside Caleb's room. "But I expect him to continue improving. The worst danger has passed." "Thank you, Doctor," Georgiana said. "I've arranged with Pete to drive me back to town at dawn tomorrow." The doctor nodded approvingly. "You've been good for him, you know. I haven't seen Caleb so content in all the years I've known him." Before she could formulate a response to that surprising statement, the doctor tipped his hat and departed, leaving her to say her goodbyes to Caleb. She found him sitting up in bed, looking more alert than he had since the shooting. When she told him of her plans to return to town, a flicker of disappointment crossed his face, quickly masked. "Of course," he said evenly. "Your students need you. And you need rest," she added, trying to keep her tone light, "which you're less likely to get with me fussing over you." He smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mrs. Flores will fuss enough for two, I assure you." An awkward silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken words. Georgiana moved to the window, gazing out at the darkening landscape. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. "So different from Pennsylvania." "Do you miss it?" he asked. "Your home?" She considered the question seriously. "I miss certain things, the green hills, the changing seasons, the familiarity of it all. But it stopped feeling like home after my father died. She turned to face him. Redemption Creek is beginning to feel more like home than I expected. I'm glad, he said simply. She crossed to the bed, smoothing the quilt with nervous hands. I'll come back to check on you next weekend, if that's acceptable. More than acceptable, he replied, catching her hand in his. Georgiana. He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. She waited, heart pounding. I want you to know how much your care has meant to me, he finally said. Not just these past days, but your friendship since you arrived. It's been my pleasure, she replied, disappointed yet understanding his caution. They were still learning each other, after all. He squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. Safe journey tomorrow. Pete's a careful driver, but the road can be rough in places. I'll be fine, she assured him. You focus on healing. Yes, madam, he replied with a ghost of his usual smile. As she left his room, Georgiana felt the weight of things unsaid hanging between them. But there would be time, she told herself. Time for words, time for understanding, time for whatever might grow between them. The next few weeks fell into a pattern. Georgiana taught school during the week, gradually winning the trust and affection of her students. On weekends, she rode out to the Triple M, where Caleb was slowly recovering his strength. Despite Dr. Miller's orders, he had begun supervising ranch operations from the house by the second week, and by the third, he was taking short walks around the property. His arm still in a sling but his color and vigor returning. Their relationship deepened with each visit. They talked for hours about books they had read, places they had seen, dreams they harbored. Caleb told her stories of his early days as a cowboy, the hardships and adventures that had shaped him. In turn, Georgiana shared memories of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her father's gentle wisdom, her mother's early death. As October gave way to November, a subtle shift occurred between them. Touches lingered, glances held meaning beyond words, and conversations sometimes trailed into comfortable silences filled with unspoken understanding. On a crisp Saturday in mid-November, nearly a month after the shooting, Georgiana arrived at the Triple M to find Caleb waiting for her on the porch. He stood tall and strong, his arm no longer in a sling, looking much like the man who had found her barefoot on the road to Redemption Creek. You're looking well, she said, accepting his help down from the wagon. Feeling well, he replied, his hand remaining on hers a moment longer than necessary. Doc gave me a clean bill of health yesterday, said I could resume all normal activities. That's wonderful news, she said sincerely. He nodded, a hint of nervousness in his expression. I thought we might celebrate with a ride. There's something I'd like to show you, if you're not too tired from your journey. Curiosity piqued, Georgiana readily agreed. Soon they were mounted on a pair of gentle horses, Caleb on his favored chestnut gelding, and Georgiana on a dappled mare with a smooth gait. They rode at an easy pace, heading west from the ranch house toward the foothills. The desert was beautiful in the clear November light, the browns and reds of the landscape vibrant against the deep blue sky. As they climbed higher, Caleb pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the land. After about an hour's ride, they reached a small plateau overlooking a hidden valley. A spring bubbled up from rocks, creating a ribbon of green that wound through the otherwise arid landscape. Cottonwood trees, their leaves golden with autumn, rustled in the gentle breeze. It's beautiful, Georgiana breathed as they dismounted. Like a secret garden in the midst of the desert. My mother found this place, Caleb said, leading her to a large, flat rock beside the spring. She called it her thinking spot. Said the water reminded her that life always finds a way, even in the harshest conditions. They sat side by side on the rock, close enough that their shoulders touched. Below them, The valley stretched out, and beyond it, the vast expanse of the ranch lands. "I've never shown anyone else this place," Caleb said quietly. "Not even the ranch hands know about it." Georgiana turned to him, touched by the significance of his admission. "Thank you for sharing it with me." He met her gaze, his gray eyes serious. "Georgiana, there's something I need to say." Her heart quickened at his tone. "Yes. These past weeks, having you in my life, talking with you, sharing thoughts and ideas, it's changed me." He took a deep breath. "I've been alone for a long time, convinced myself it was better that way. Safer. And now," she asked softly, "now I can't imagine going back to that solitude." He took her hand in his calloused palm warm against her skin. "I find myself thinking about you when you're not there, wondering what you'd say about a sunset, or how you'd laugh at something one of the hands does." Hope bloomed in her chest, but she remained silent, letting him find his words. "I'm not a man given to flowery speech," he continued, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "But I know my own mind, and my own heart." He looked directly into her eyes. "I love you, Georgiana Mackenzie. I think I started falling the moment I saw you standing barefoot in the dust on that road to town." Joy, pure and overwhelming, flooded through her. "Oh, Caleb," she whispered, "I love you too." The smile that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the desert. Gently, he raised a hand to cup her cheek, his touch reverent. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. In answer, she leaned forward, closing the distance between them. His lips met hers in a kiss that began tenderly and deepened as she responded, her hands moving to his shoulders. He tasted of coffee and mint, and something essentially Caleb that made her heart race. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "Why didn't you?" she asked, her fingers lightly tracing the line of his jaw. "Wasn't sure you felt the same," he replied honestly. "And I didn't want to presume on our friendship if you didn't." She smiled, loving his honorable nature even as she shook her head at his doubts. "I've been half in love with you since you carried me up Mrs. Miller's porch steps." His laugh was low and warm. "We've wasted time then." "Not wasted," she corrected. "We were learning each other, building a foundation." He nodded, appreciating her wisdom. "Still, I don't want to waste any more time." He took both her hands in his expression serious again. "Georgiana, I know this may seem sudden, but I'm certain of my feelings. Will you marry me? Be my wife, my partner in all things?" Though she had begun to hope for such a proposal, the reality of it still took her breath away. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you, Caleb McKinnon." Joy blazed in his eyes as he pulled her into another kiss, this one filled with promise and passion. When they separated, both breathing heavily, he looked slightly dazed. "I didn't expect to find you," he said wonderingly. "Wasn't looking for love when I rode out that day." "Perhaps love found us instead," she suggested, resting her head against his shoulder as his arm encircled her. They sat together in companionable silence, watching as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the valley. The future stretched before them, full of promise and possibility. "When shall we marry?" Georgiana asked eventually. Caleb considered. "Christmas is coming. Would a Christmas wedding suit you? It gives us just over a month to prepare." "Perfect," she agreed, "though I have no family to invite." "You have me," he said simply. "And the whole town has practically adopted you already. We'll have family enough." The wedding of Caleb McKinnon and Georgiana Mackenzie became the social event of the year in Redemption Creek. Held in the small church on Christmas Eve 1883, It drew nearly every resident of the town and surrounding ranches. Margaret Miller took charge of the preparations, enlisting help from the Women's Auxiliary to decorate the church with pine boughs, red ribbons, and candles. The general store ordered special fabric from Tucson for Georgiana's wedding dress, which Mrs. Peterson and several other women helped to sew. The ceremony itself was simple but deeply meaningful. Georgiana, radiant in ivory satin with her chestnut hair arranged in an elegant crown of braids, walked down the aisle alone but unafraid. Waiting for her at the altar stood Caleb, handsome in a new black suit, his face alight with love and pride as he watched her approach. "Dearly beloved," began Reverend Thompson, beaming at the couple before him, "we are gathered here in the sight of God and this company to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Their vows were traditional but spoken with profound sincerity. When Caleb slipped a gold band onto Georgiana's finger crafted by the town's blacksmith from a small nugget of Arizona gold, tears of joy glistened in her eyes. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," declared the Reverend. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." The kiss that sealed their union was brief but tender, mindful of the church setting yet unmistakably passionate. The celebration afterward, held in the town hall, lasted well into the night. There was music from local fiddle players, dancing, and a feast contributed by families throughout the community. Mayor Hargrove made a speech praising the new schoolteacher who had captured their hearts and the respected rancher who had finally met his match. "To Caleb and Georgiana," he toasted, raising his glass. "May your union be blessed with love, prosperity, and many children to fill that big ranch house." As midnight approached, the newlyweds slipped away from the festivities, boarding a decorated wagon that would take them to the Triple M. Wrapped in warm blankets against the December chill, they gazed up at the star-filled sky as the horses trotted steadily homeward. "Happy, Mrs. McKinnon?" Caleb asked, his arms secure around her shoulders. "Completely," she replied, savoring the sound of her new name. "And you, husband?" "More than I ever thought possible," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. The ranch house glowed with welcome as they approached, lanterns lit in every window by Mrs. Flores, who had gone ahead to prepare for their arrival. Inside, the housekeeper had left a simple supper warming by the fire, a bottle of champagne chilling in a bucket of ice, and fresh flowers in their bedroom before tactfully retiring to her quarters in the back of the house. Later, as they lay together in the large four-poster bed, Georgiana's head resting on Caleb's chest, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "About the day we met," she replied. "How lost and desperate I felt, and how you appeared like an answer to a prayer I hadn't even formed yet." He tightened his arms around her. "I think about that day too, how brave you looked, standing there barefoot in the dust, determined to keep going despite everything." "I wasn't brave," she demurred. "I was terrified." "That's what makes it bravery," he countered. "Facing your fear and continuing anyway." He kissed the top of her head. "When I said I'd walk beside you, shoes or not, I meant it for that moment. But now I mean it for life." Tears pricked at her eyes. "I never imagined finding such happiness when I left Pennsylvania. Feels like a dream." "If it is," he murmured, tilting her face up for a kiss, "I never want to wake." Spring came early to the Arizona Territory in 1884. By March, wildflowers carpeted the desert in brilliant patches of color, and new calves dotted the Triple M's pastures. Georgiana continued teaching at the schoolhouse, riding back and forth each day on the dappled mare that had been Caleb's wedding gift to her. The couple settled into a rhythm of shared life that suited them perfectly. Mornings began with coffee on the porch, watching the sunrise while discussing the day ahead. Evenings were spent by the fire, reading aloud to each other or simply talking. Nights brought the sweet intimacy of marriage, a continuing discovery of love in its most tender expression. As April bloomed, Georgiana began to suspect a new blessing was on its way. When Dr. Miller confirmed her pregnancy, Caleb's joy knew no bounds. He immediately began planning nursery renovations and insisting she reduce her teaching hours, though she gently but firmly reminded him that women had been teaching while expecting since time immemorial. "At least let me escort you to and from school," he compromised, concern evident in his eyes. "Until I become too ungainly to mount a horse," she agreed with a laugh. "Then I suppose you'll have to drive me in the buggy." As summer approached, Georgiana's condition became known to the townspeople, who responded with delight and an outpouring of practical assistance. Margaret Miller organized the women to begin sewing baby clothes, while Caleb received endless advice from the men about fatherhood, most of which he accepted with good-natured patience. In July, just as Georgiana was preparing to take a leave from teaching until after the baby's birth, a letter arrived from Boston. The Triple M's owner, Mr. Montgomery, wrote to inform Caleb that he was selling his Arizona holdings to focus on his Eastern business interests. As a gesture of appreciation for Caleb's years of service, he offered him the first opportunity to purchase the ranch at a price considerably below market value. "It's more than fair," Caleb said as they discussed the proposition over dinner. "With what I've saved, plus a bank loan, we could manage it." Georgiana watched his face, noting the excitement he was trying to contain. "You want this very much, don't you?" "I do," he admitted. "I've poured my heart into this land for years. The thought of owning it, of building something that could be passed down to our children." He placed a hand gently on her rounded belly. "It feels right." "Then we should do it," she said decisively. "This is our home, Caleb, our future. Let's make it truly ours." The deal was concluded by early August, and the Triple M officially became the property of Caleb and Georgiana McKinnon. To celebrate, they hosted a barbecue for the ranch hands and their families, as well as friends from town. Under the shade of cottonwood trees, with tables laden with food and children playing games on the lawn, Caleb raised a toast. "To the future of the Triple M," he said, his free arm around Georgiana's waist, "and to the woman who makes that future bright." As autumn painted the desert in golds and reds, Georgiana's time drew near. On a crisp October morning, almost exactly a year after she and Caleb had first declared their love at the hidden spring, their daughter was born. They named her Catherine Margaret McKinnon, Catherine for Caleb's mother, and Margaret for the woman who had first welcomed Georgiana to Redemption Creek. Cradling his newborn daughter, Caleb's face reflected wonder and profound love. "She's perfect," he whispered, touching a gentle finger to the infant's tiny hand. "Just like her mother." Georgiana watched them, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain such happiness. "She has your eyes," she observed, noting the stormy gray color that would likely darken with time. "Poor child," Caleb joked, but his gaze never left his daughter's face. Later, as twilight settled over the ranch and Catherine slept peacefully in her cradle, Caleb and Georgiana sat together on the porch swing, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked softly. "A year ago, did you ever think your life would change so completely?" He considered the question. "No," he admitted. "I had resigned myself to a certain kind of life, not unhappy, but solitary." "You changed everything, Georgiana." "As you did for me," she replied. "When I left Pennsylvania, I hoped only for security, perhaps some small measure of contentment. I never dreamed of finding such love. It found us," he reminded her, echoing her words from that day at the spring, "when you stood barefoot in the dust, and I knew, somehow, that my place was beside you." The stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, bearing witness to their quiet happiness. Behind them, the lamp in the nursery cast a gentle glow through the window, illuminating the beginning of their family's story. "I love you, Caleb McKinnon," Georgiana said, lifting her face for his kiss. "And I love you," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days to come." As their lips met, the desert wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying the promise of seasons yet to unfold, of children yet to be born, of a love that would continue to deepen with each passing year. For Georgiana and Caleb, the journey that had begun with a chance meeting on a dusty road had led to a destination neither could have imagined: a shared life built on love, respect, and the courage to walk beside each other, no matter what path lay ahead. 10 years later, the Triple M Ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous in the Arizona Territory. The main house had been expanded to accommodate the McKinnon family, which now included Catherine, 8, and twin boys, James and Thomas, 5. The land holdings had doubled, and the cattle herd was renowned for its quality throughout the Southwest. Georgiana still taught at the schoolhouse in town, though now only 3 days a week. The other days, she managed the ranch accounts and correspondence, her organizational skills proving as valuable to their business as Caleb's knowledge of cattle and land. Together, they had built not just a successful ranch but a true partnership. On a warm evening in May of 1894, they sat on the same porch swing where they had shared so many moments, watching their children play in the yard. Catherine, already showing signs of her mother's intelligence and her father's determination, was teaching her brothers a game involving a ball and complicated rules of her own devising. "She'll be running the ranch before she's 20, Caleb observed with pride. "And the territory by 30, Georgiana added with a laugh. "I wouldn't be surprised if she becomes one of the first female governors when Arizona achieves statehood." Caleb took his wife's hand, raising it to his lips. At 39, his hair was beginning to show strands of silver at the temples, and lines of experience bracketed his eyes, but he was still as handsome as the day she'd met him. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked suddenly. "Staying here instead of continuing to Tucson? You could have taught at a proper school with better resources." Georgiana turned to him in surprise. "What brought this on?" He shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "Something Mayor Hargrove said yesterday. About how lucky Redemption Creek was that the stagecoach left you stranded. Got me thinking about all you gave up." "Oh, Caleb," she said softly, reaching up to touch his face. "I gave up nothing of value and gained everything that matters. My life here, with you and our children, is beyond anything I could have hoped for." The doubt in his eyes faded at her words. "I feel the same," he said. "Sometimes I just want to make sure you do too." "After all these years you still worry?" she asked gently. "Not worry exactly," he clarified. "More like amazement that you chose this life." "Chose me?" Georgiana leaned against him, watching their children play in the golden evening light. "Best choice I ever made," she said simply. "And one I'd make again in a heartbeat." The years had taught them both that love wasn't just the passion of new discovery, but the deeper current of daily choice, choosing each other through challenges and joys, through the mundane and the extraordinary moments that made up a shared life. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of amber and rose, Caleb pulled his wife closer. "Remember what I told you the day we met?" he asked. Georgiana smiled, the memory as clear as if it had happened yesterday. "You said, 'Shoes or not, I'll walk beside you.'" "I meant it then," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And I mean it now." "I know," she replied, her heart full, "and I've never once doubted it." In the yard, Catherine's laughter rang out as she chased her brothers, their small boots raising puffs of the same desert dust that had witnessed the beginning of their parents' journey. The Triple M ranch house stood solid behind them, a testament to what could be built from courage, hard work, and love. As twilight deepened into evening, Georgiana and Caleb remained on the porch, hand in hand, watching over all they had created together: a family, a home, a legacy. The path that had once seemed so uncertain had led to a destination more beautiful than either could have imagined, proving that sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with the simple decision to walk beside someone, no matter what the road ahead might hold.